Hi everyone, welcome to the Pack Publishing series Learning Meteor Application Development. I'm your host Isaac Strack, and together we will learn about the new and exciting full-stack JavaScript technology known as Meteor. We will learn everything we need to know to develop and deploy Meteor apps.
Meteor is one of the fastest growing web application frameworks available today, and for good reason. It embraces the principles of reactive programming that flat out make your life easier. Through Meteor's Distributed Data Protocol, or DDP, client applications become significantly more useful, because instead of receiving rendered HTML from the server, clients instead receive data on the wire. This allows the clients to act as true web applications rather than just simple repeaters of content that was rendered on the server. Meteor is also a full-stack JavaScript framework, meaning that all the code that you'll write on the client side and on the server side will be written in JavaScript. In fact, you can actually reuse certain libraries across both the client and the server. Meteor supports database transactions on both the client and the server, allowing you to make changes in the UI and have those changes instantly reflected, whether you be online or offline. And Meteor takes care of all the crunchy database synchronization for you. This functionality comes together in what Meteor calls full-stack reactivity. You can have multiple clients and servers speaking to each other all over DDP in pretty much any modern programming language. Finally, Meteor applications are written with a simple declarative style. This means that rather than having to worry about the state of every element, you can write clear, concise, declarative code, making for a much more rapid and productive development experience. We believe that programming should be fun, and throughout this course we will show you how Meteor's simple, declarative, reactive data model can help you build better applications.
This series is laid out in 5 sections with 4 or 5 videos in each section, walking through installation and prep, using Meteor's reactive data collections to quickly add content, creating clean, simple web services, including REST services, leveraging Meteor's built-in reactive model to create elegant user interfaces, and deploying your application for testing and for production use on your own servers. By the end of the series, you should expect to be able to easily and effortlessly develop your own Meteor applications and be well on your way to mastering one of the best and brightest new frameworks available. Our next video will be setting up Meteor. So open your favorite editor, fire up the command line, and let's get started.
Today we'll be going over the second video in section 1 of getting up and running with Meteor. Specifically, we will be talking about how to set up Meteor. We will go over which operating systems Meteor supports and which ones it plans to support in the near future so you can get up and running quickly. We'll also be doing a manual installation of Node and NPM because Meteor depends on them and you probably already have them installed anyway. And then finally, we will do an actual installation of Meteor from the command line. So buckle up, we'll be up and running in no time. Open up a browser and navigate to meteor.com and go ahead and click on Install Meteor there in the middle. Okay. And we can see from here all of the different operating systems that Meteor supports. Meteor has always supported OS X and Linux through the command line, and the curl command that you see right here, we'll use that in just a minute, but we want to emphasize that as of the last release, Meteor now has official support for Windows, which is great news for all of you Windows users out there that you no longer have to use any workarounds, and of course you can always use Nitrous IO for Chromebook. So wonderful options we have. We're now going to go directly into an installation of Node. Now Meteor is built on top of Node, and so it requires Node and NPM to be installed. We're going to show the manual installation of Node because Node and NPM by themselves are very valuable, and you want to have them installed regardless of whether you have Meteor installed. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We're going to go over and click on Install. Once the download is complete, we'll go ahead and install the package. And we're going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit just so we don't waste your time. Okay, great. Node has been installed, and you'll notice the location under user local bin, and NPM has been installed as well. So now we're going to go ahead and check that installation. So we'll close this window. We will open a terminal window, and inside the terminal window we will type node-v. And here we see that we have version 0.10.33, which, double checking, is the current version. So lo and behold, Node is installed. We're now ready to install Meteor. So we're going to go to meteor.com, click on Install, and here is the curl command that we can run in the command line. Now, you can go ahead and copy this, but I'm going to go ahead and type it in. So I'm going to type in curl https:// install.meteor.com and pipe it to sh so that it knows what the script to run. Now this will download, take just a few minutes to download here. We've sped this up for you. And there it is. Meteor is installed. We're going to go ahead and check that by typing meteor -- version. And we have Meteor 1.0 installed. Very quick and painless. So we have learned about the different operating systems that Meteor supports, namely Linux, Mac, and Windows. And of course, you can even use it on a Chromebook. We installed Node and NPM manually, and we showed you how to install Meteor. So everything you need to know to get started. Our next video is an introduction to Meteor scaffolding, where we'll go over setting up your projects right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you then. Today we will be going over the third video in section 1, getting up and running with Meteor, and this will be an introduction to Meteor scaffolding. Whenever you start a project in Meteor, you're going to want to have a very specific file structure. The reason for that project folder structure is to make sure that everything executes cleanly, and what gets executed on the client and on the server, or on both, depending on your folder structure. Likewise, the order of execution is also determined by the folders that your particular files may be in and by the names of those files. And then finally, there's some visibility and scope issues that we'll want to cover. Okay, so the first part of this has to do with the basic folder structure. Whenever you start a project, this is pretty much the 3 folders that you're going to create. The first one is a client folder, a server folder is the second, and then the third is pretty much anything else, but we're going to use the word model. Now the first one, the client folder, will execute code on the client only. That means that you don't have to worry about interfering with anything on the server. Likewise, there's a server folder for anything on the server. It keeps your client and server nice and clean. And then you have pretty much anything else, any other kind of folder will activate on both the client and the server. So a typical setup will look like this. You'll have your client, you'll have your model, which you'll keep your collections inside of, and that executes on both the client and the server. And then you'll have your server folder, and that keeps a nice clean separation between the two. We're now going to look at the order of execution. Okay? Depending on what your folder structure looks like and what your files are named, they will actually execute in a different order. There are 4 orders of execution. The first one has to do with the lib folder itself. The lib folder trumps pretty much everything else. If something is inside of a lib folder, it will run first. Then comes subfolders. Anything that is a subfolder to a parent folder will run before anything inside of the parent folder. Next comes the alphabet. So if something is labeled with an a.js versus a b.js, the a will run first. And then finally, there's one rule that trumps them all, and that's a main.star. Whenever you have a main.star rule, that means that it will execute last no matter what, even over lib. We'll actually see an example of that down here below. So we have listed out here various different files that have printed out to the console. First one we have is the client lib tests and model lib test, and you'll notice that these follow the rule about lib trumps everything. So because they are in a lib folder, and also because they're alphabetized client and then model, they executed in that order. Right? The next 2 files start with an A for a subfolder and B for a subfolder. So these follow 2 rules. The first is that it's actually a subfolder, and the second is that they are alphabetized. So that's why they ran in the order of aardvark and then bravo. And finally, we have something just regular in the root client test folder. And then we have client lib main and client main. Now you'll notice that that's inside of the lib folder, and that's pretty interesting because lib's supposed to trump everything. But as we mentioned before, it's a main.js, and the main.js has the last word. So following these basic 4 rules, you'll be able to make sure that your code executes in the proper order. And now we come to visibility and scope. Okay, there are certain files and folders inside of Meteor that help us to be able to produce static content or view static content or keep files hidden. The first 2 that we want to talk about have to do with server-side interaction and static content. The first one is public, and the second one is private. Now, the public folder serves static visible content such as images, and the private folders also serve static content, but it's only available on the server side through a library called assets, and we'll see how that works in just a minute here. So we've gone ahead and created 2 folders, the private and public folders, and inside of the public folder we've got a nice logo. And if we look inside of the private folder, we've also got a text file called private.txt. Okay, here's what the logo looks like. It's just the Pack Publishing logo inside of that public folder. And inside of the private folder, we've got a little message there that says it's visible by using assets assets.getText. And we'll see exactly what that looks like right here. This is the assets.getText call, and this is able to access that private folder and then print it out to the console. And we'll see what that looks like. Right, so if we go into a browser and we type in our local host, and we don't have to use public, we'll just go ahead and put in packed-logo.png. Lo and behold, there's our file. We'll now flip over to the server console, and in the server console, we'll see that assets.getText worked properly. There is the contents of that private.txt file. So both public and private give us some really great options in how we can access static content. We're now going to go over the rule about anything. Now, this is anything with a dot on it. If you put that in there, it will be hidden from a server refresh. This comes in very, very handy when you're looking to upload images and you don't want your whole server to restart. Because anytime that there's a file change in Meteor, Meteor will restart and refresh the page. Now, finally, we come to client/compatibility. Now, there are certain libraries out there that make use of the var declaration whenever you're declaring variables. It's a pretty smart thing to do, but it's a type of legacy code according to Meteor. Now, if you have the var declared in a regular file, then that file will actually be invisible, as you'll see in just a moment here. We have that one. But now if we click into compatibility, we've created a compatibility folder, and we'll do the exact same thing, except this time we'll call it visible, and the only difference between invisible and visible is which folder it's in. This one is in the compatibility folder. The other one is in just a regular folder on the server. So now let's see what that looks like. In the console, we can see that var visible is truly visible, and that's because it was declared inside of the compatibility folder, whereas invisible, which was not declared inside of compatibility, is not defined. And it doesn't matter if we manually look for this, we're going to get the same result. So if you have legacy code, make sure you put it into compatibility. Okay, so we went over a project folder structure for a basic project, which includes a client folder for client-only code, a server folder for server-only code, and then pretty much any other folder. We use a model to make sure that we declare our collections for both the client and the server. Now, we also went over order of execution and visibility and scope, which can help us to really keep our code fresh and tight. Our next video is very exciting. It's creating your first app. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. We will be going over the fourth video in section 1 today of getting up and running with Meteor, and that is creating your first application. Okay, to create your first application, we're going to do it in 3 easy steps. First, we're going to use the Meteor Create tool in the command line. Next, we're going to set up our file structure that we learned about in our last video. And then finally, we'll show you some tips for monitoring and debugging to make your development effort that much easier and that much more rewarding. Let's get started by going to the command line and entering the command Meteor Create Snippets. And when we run this, this will create a new Meteor application for us. Simply go into that directory, cd snippets, run Meteor, and we are off and running. Our application is up and running in localhost 3000. If we go into a browser, we can see, there we go, Meteor is up and running. And go ahead and click around a couple times to make sure that it is all up and running correctly, but there shouldn't be any problems doing that. Easy first step. Next one is setting up our file structure, and this is similar to what we had before. First thing we're going to do is get rid of any of the existing default files that were created. So we're going to do an rm snippets.star to get rid of all of that. And then we're going to go ahead and make the 3 directories that we talked about in our last video: a client directory, a server directory, and a model directory. And we'll use all of these subsequently in upcoming chapters, but we should be good for now. All right, we're going to go ahead and open our application folder. And you see here we've got the client, the model, and the server. We're going to start off by creating a snippets.html file. We're going to add some HTML inside of here just to get us going. We're going to put in a body tag real quickly. Go ahead and put in an h1. And welcome everybody to our snippets page and to our snippets lib. Make sure that that's working correctly. It looks like it's all working good. Okay. Everything looks great inside of there. We're now going to create a little bit of styling. So we don't want the default text. So we're going to go ahead and put in here just a real quick font family, change it to, let's say, sans serif, and make sure that looks good, looks great. Move on here. We're going to go ahead and create our first client JavaScript file. And this JavaScript file is just going to be for general use. If we need to get really specific, then we have those folder structures that we talked about in our last video. We can keep things nice and clean through that. So we're just going to go ahead and create this generic file for now, just kind of a placeholder. Okay, we're going to do the same thing inside of model. Here in the model, we actually need to worry about one of our collections. So we're going to be storing everything inside of a client collection. As you remember, anything that's in this model directory is going to be in both the client and the server. So we're going to go ahead and declare snippets equals new mongo.collection. And we're going to go ahead and give it a name right after that. So collection, and we're going to go ahead and give it snippets. So there we go. And now that will run on both the client and the server. Okay, and we'll see what that looks like in just a minute. But now we're going to also create one placeholder file on the server itself, server.js. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make this also a general purpose server-side code experience. If we need to get specific later on, we will. And we're going to go ahead and save that. Take a look now at our file structure. We've got client, we've got model, we've got server, and the corresponding files. We can add other folders as needed, but we should be good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and look at some of the monitoring and debugging possibilities that are out there, some of the things that can really help us along. First one is just have a browser open to the left and be able to code from the right. As you notice, as we make changes over here to welcome to the snippets lib, or we add an H2 inside of here, anything that we change on the side and save, it's instantly going to be reflected on the other side. Okay, so that's one way that we can instantly get some feedback in what we're doing. The next portion has to do with the debug, the console. We can always do a console.log inside of here. We can declare variables. We can write any JavaScript that we want to inside of here, as you can see. We can even make an alert. It might get a little bit annoying, but that's another availability to you inside of there. Now, remember we had the snippets collection inside of there, and we created that snippets collection. Now we're actually going to populate that snippets collection. We can do this from the command line, again, right in the console, because we still have the insecure package in there. And we're just going to write a nice message in here. I am your first snippet. Go ahead and write that out, run the snippets insert, and lo and behold, there it is. There's our object, auto created it, and we got a text, and we've already created one snippet. Similarly, on the server side, if we can use the console.log inside of there, inside programmatically in our program. So you'll notice we're in server.js right now, and we're just going to put in a quick console.log so we can log to the server console and see that it does appear immediately over there after the server has restarted. Okay. So we can use that to debug any of our code whenever we need to find out where we are in a placeholder. We can always use console.log on the server side, right? Always a possibility, right? There's finally one other opportunity that we have, and this is to use what we call Meteor Shell. This is brand new. This as of 1.01, I believe. Very, very cool. So you essentially have a console or a interactive shell for the server side as you're running. So you can do the same exact thing that you did on the client side over here. You can declare variables, just like you were seeing now, x equals, we are now on the server side. And we can also access, say, for example, our snippets collection. So if we do a snippets find one, here we'll be able to also see the snippets, the first snippet that was in there. So as a summary, we used Meteor Create very quickly to create our shell application. We set up our file structure inside it, and we saw a lot of monitoring and debugging tools that are available to us inside of Meteor. All right, so that was kind of a whirlwind there we went through, but we are ready to move on to our next video, which is enhancing our app with custom packages. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. We are now on our 5th video in our first section on getting up and running with Meteor. We've got a great video today on enhancing your app with custom packages. So we're going to be going over some of the default packages that Meteor offers. We're going to be going over all of the ways to access the third-party packages that are out there. And we'll go through adding or removing packages and even doing a little bit of versioning so that if we want to look to a back package, we can do that. So the first thing we need to do is find out inside of our application, in our snippets application, what we currently have. We're going to go ahead and type Meteor list, and we see that we have 3 packages by default. We first have auto publish, okay? We have insecure, and we have Meteor platform. Okay, these are considered core Meteor packages. These are the ones that come when you just do a general Meteor create. Meteor supports a variety of different packages out of the box. These are packages that they have created, the core group has created, and there are several third-party libraries to look at too. We're going to now look into a way that we can find some of those, and that's through the command line. Doing a simple Meteor search, we can look by author, we can look by different types, but we're going to go ahead and look by author right now. We're going to look for Meteor hacks, okay, just as an example. You can pretty much do any kind of search that you want to, and you can find out which packages are available from which authors, or you can do searches by keyword as well. Okay. The other way that we can do searches is through a wonderful graphical interface. It's called Atmosphere. Atmosphere.js.com is the exact same representation that we saw in the command line. So in the command line, we're able to do searches in the command line using the CLI version, and Atmosphere.js is the graphical version of that same thing. So as we're typing here, it'll pull up the different various packages that are available. Let's actually go ahead and take a look at that and do something useful with this. So we need to find a particular package for Bootstrap. We want to skin our application and make it look pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and do a search for Bootstrap. There's quite a few that are in there, but this one right here, twbs.bootstrap, is the official Bootstrap implementation of our package. So Atmosphere gives us a whole lot more than just the name of the package. You can see in here a table of contents, there's a README, there's a history, there's even the ability to go directly to the GitHub source code and to report bugs from this area. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this over. We need to add this particular Bootstrap. So we're coming into the command line now, and we're going to go ahead and copy and paste that in there. Meteor add twbs : bootstrap. Go ahead and hit run, and this is going to install really quickly, and we'll see that it's officially installed. So we have Bootstrap. Hey, look, it made such a huge difference in what we were doing before, but it'll actually get a little bit better in just a minute here. Okay, now we need to look into some default Meteor packages, and these are the Accounts UI packages. We want to be able to have a login for our screen, so we're going to add the default Accounts UI package. This will actually install Accounts Base and some other things with it. We also want to add the Accounts password. Now, there are multiple different accounts applications or packages that we could use. This one is the simplest. It just requires a user ID and a password. We're going to go ahead and install that one by doing Meteor add accounts password, and that gave us our password support. So let's go ahead and see this in use now. We're going to add a template directive for login buttons directly to here, and this is part of the package that we just added it in. And without doing anything else but saving that change, we're able to have a full-fledged email, user ID, and password creation inside of our application. All right, so we want that login that we have to take advantage of Bootstrap. And luckily enough, Ian out there in the wild has created an Accounts UI Bootstrap specifically for Bootstrap 3. This is wonderful news because it means that we don't have to do any of the styling or coding on our own. So all we need to do now is just go ahead and add that package in. We're going to copy and paste what we found on Atmosphere for Meteor add Ian Accounts UI Bootstrap 3. It's going to download those packages for us. It's going to get any dependencies that there may have been in there, and lo and behold, it's installed as well. So we have gone over default Meteor packages. We've seen some third-party packages, and now we're going to go into a little bit of adding, removing, and versioning. Okay, so we have a conflict right now. We have created, or we've added the Accounts UI package, and we've also added the Accounts UI 3 for Bootstrap package. They conflict with each other. So we're going to go ahead and remove the default Accounts UI one now. We're going to type in Meteor, remove Accounts UI, and just like that, it's removed. And we are now going to remove, just because we're going to need it later on, we're going to also remove auto publish. We're going to be doing that for later videos. So we're going to remove those two. So that's all there is to removing it. Removing it's just as simple as adding it. And you can see here that it's now skinned according to the Bootstrap way of doing things. We want to put it into a toolbar. So we're going back to the how to use section that Ian provided for us. We're going to copy that code over, and we're actually going to put it into our body. We're going to make a couple of changes on the navbar brand. We're going to change that to snippets. Okay. And we really don't need the link that's in there right now. We can add links later on if we want to. We just want the cool toolbar. So we're going to cut that out and take out a little bit of the comments there. And you'll notice that the login buttons is still right there towards the end. So that template directive is still there. We're going to save these changes inside of here. Once we just format things a little bit easier, make it a little bit easier to read, We're going to go ahead and save those changes. And now, lo and behold, look at that. We've got our snippets toolbar. We have a sign up and sign in over to the right, and we are able to sign up and sign in and create accounts. And it all looks consistent with the Bootstrap theme. So just like that, we added a couple of packages. We used some code that was in the samples, and we're off and running. There is one more layout package that we're interested in, and that's a masonry package. So we're going to go ahead and type in masonry here, and we're looking for the Voodoo Hop Masonrify. Okay, this is a masonry style layout, and it's specifically built around the Blaze UI or the Meteor UI. All right, let's copy and paste that and go ahead and install that in the command line. And it'll take just a minute to update, and there we go. We've got our easy masonry style layouts for Masonrify inside of our application. Now let's make one final list here. Let's look at Meteor list, and we should have, we look inside of there, yep, we've got our Accounts UI Bootstrap, we've got TWB Bootstrap, the official Bootstrap, and we've got Voodoo Hop. So that's absolutely perfect. We do want to hit one last thing, and that has to do with versioning. Now, if you want an earlier version of something, all you need to do is when you do the add, put the version number in with an @equals. So we're going to try this with Masonrify. We're going to go @equals 0.0.2. Okay, we're going to go ahead and install this, and it will download that specific version. So we do have that rollback version of it. And if we now take a look at the list, it will tell us, yes, you do have Voodoo Hop Masonrify, but there's an asterisk next to it. That's telling us that there are newer versions available. We knew what we were doing when we added this in. It's just for example, so we're going to go ahead and remove that. And oops, looks like we don't need the @ symbol when we remove it. So we'll go ahead and remove it that way, and we'll add it back in with the latest and greatest inside of there. We really want to do that to make sure that we do have the latest and greatest in case there are any bug fixes inside of there, and we're good to go. All right, so we'll do a final list now to make sure everything's good. We do have accounts password. We've got Ian, accounts UI Bootstrap 3. We've got Insecure, Meteor Platform. Those are the default ones. We've got Twitter Bootstrap, and we've got Voodoo Hop Masonrify. That's everything that we need inside of our application. Okay, one last thing. Let's go ahead and take out the styles directive. We don't need sans serif anymore because we're using Bootstrap and it's all about sans serif. Make sure everything looks good. Bootstrap really does clean things up for us. Okay, so we installed some default Meteor packages. We installed some third-party packages, and we also removed a couple of packages, went over the versioning that's available inside of there. So kind of a whirlwind tour, but I think you get the idea. Our next section is 2, creating collections and adding content. We're really going to get going. Super excited. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you then. Today we will be going over video 1 in section 2, creating content and adding collections. Specifically, we will be going over template inclusions and when to use them, using an each helper or loop to be able to go over our data collection, and we will be using various other types of template helpers along the way. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we need to deal with is our toolbar that we created in our last video. So this particular toolbar right here, you can see there's quite a bit of code inside of here, and we're going to use a template inclusion. So we're going to go ahead and copy that into our clipboard, and then we're going to put in a template inclusion. And this is how you put in a template inclusion, with a caret, and then the name of what your template is going to be. In this case, we're going to use the word toolbar. Okay, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We're now going to go create a new file inside of client, tmpl-toolbar.html, and we will paste this content from the toolbar, and we'll wrap it inside of a template tag. So we'll go ahead and put in here template, make sure we spell it correctly, name equals toolbar, which was the name that we used before. And make sure we close that tag off, put it in the correct location. There we go. All right, and now we're refreshing our page and saved our changes, and you can see that it looks exactly the same. Even though in our side of our HTML, in our main HTML page, we have a template inclusion. I'm now going to go ahead and create another one, and this is for our content. So we're going to go ahead and put in snippets. This is what we're going to call the body of our main page, where we're going to be able to see the content from our snippets library. So we're going to create that. We're going to create a new file called tmpl.snippets.html. We are going to name the template, of course, snippets, because that's what our template inclusion was referring to. Inside of here, we're going to go ahead and make a div container, class type container. That's just kind of centered on the page nicely. Now we're going to use an each loop. Now this each loop is going to go over the snippets array or the snippets collection. And anything that's inside of this snippets collection, inside of this little each helper here, is going to be displayed as an individual line. So here in this case, we're creating a div with a class of snippet. And we're going to use another helper inside of here, and this is just a pointer to a property inside of there. You notice we use the word text. Now we don't see anything here on the page per se, but as we go in here and we take a look at it, you can see that the container is created. So even though we don't have anything inside of our collection, we have that new container. So we can tell that everything's working correctly. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to be able to see where our snippets are. We do have one snippet in there, so why is it not displaying? Let's go ahead and make the changes that we need to make here. First thing we need to do is we need to publish this. Okay, and remember we took out the auto publish package, so we need to make sure that we publish this. So we're going to do meteor.publish, and we're just going to publish snippets, and we're going to return the cursor. That means we're going to put in snippets.find, just like that. That's going to return a cursor to our client. So it's going to publish or broadcast out that on the snippets channel. So inside of the client, under client.js, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to type in meteor.subscribe, and we're going to subscribe to snippets. And that's it. So now our collection is available inside of the client. And we'll see that in just a minute here. Notice the snippets and snippets channel are the exact same. And we have inside of there the publish function. Let's go ahead and change those to single quotations instead. But now on the client, when we do a snippets find, we can see that we have that record inside of there. Okay, so we're just one step away from getting that to display up inside of here, inside of the snippets templates. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll switch back over to our editor. And inside of our editor, we're going to make a new file, and this is where we're going to create some template helpers. Okay, so we're going to call tmpl-snippets.js, and we're going to go ahead and put in template, the name of our template, which is snippets.helpers, and we're going to declare different helpers here. And remember, we're doing an each on the word snippets, so it's looking for a snippets collection with a lowercase s. So we're going to create that right now as one of our helpers. Snippets. I'm going to create a function. And inside of this function, we're going to just return a big snippets, that's the collection, find, fetch. And what that's going to do is anytime that there's a change, that will run again. So the snippets collection will be automatically updated, and therefore our template will be updated. And there we go. Our first snippet is applied there. Let's go ahead and add a couple more snippets just using the command line here. So we'll go snippets.insert, text, and I am your second snippet. Go ahead and run that, and instantly, once we hit enter here, there it is. There's our second snippet. So let's go ahead and open up the elements and take a look here. You can see that we have a div class snippet and a div class snippet, one for the first and one for the second that we've added. And this corresponds directly to our template that we created with our each snippets, and you'll notice that we're using the text helper inside of there to display the text that we added to our snippet. Okay, nice and easy. Let's add one more snippet just for good measure. I'll go ahead and do a snippets insert. I am your third snippet, and just like that, we've added to the collection and added a new snippet. So we use template inclusions, including for our toolbar and also for our snippets template inclusions, to be able to cleanly separate out our code into different files, being able to create those templates nice and clean, very easy to manage. We used an each iterator inside of one of our templates, inside of our snippets template, to be able to go over the snippets collection and add a div for each new element that's added to the page automatically. And of course, we use some template helpers. We initially used default template helper for the text to be able to add the text in, but then we also used a template helper to create that collections array or that iteration, so that every time that there's a new change, then the collection gets updated and our templates get updated as well. So our next video is going to be adding content through user input. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then. This is going to be the second video in section 2, creating content and adding collections. adding content through user input. Specifically, we'll show how to use the default HTML input elements inside of Meteor templates, and we will handle those events through the template events handlers section. So here we go. Now, as you can see up here in the top of the screen, we have a lot of real estate to deal with. So we're going to go ahead and put in a text area and a button inside of there. So we're going into our tmpl toolbar.html file. We're going to go ahead and add a new list item, and we're going to create a class. And the class name here is going to be navbar form, some other stuff. The Bootstrap needs navbar left to make it look nice and good. And then we're going to put in a specific form group inside of there. So we're going to put an input with an ID of txt add. We're going to make sure that it is of type text and format it here just a little bit. Make sure that it's nice and readable. Okay, and we're also going to put in a placeholder that says add snippet. All right, so we've added our input inside of there. Now let's go ahead and make our button the same way. I'm going to do the ID of btn add to that and give it a little bit of class information that Bootstrap likes to format it nice and blue, and there we go. It's on our screen. It is a little bit short. It could be longer, so we're going to go into a styles.css file, and that txt add ID, we're just going to do a 10 rem on side of it, which is a root m. And as you can see, it's nice and long now. So there we go. We've added our element. And now what we want to be able to do is when we add text inside of here and we either click add or hit enter, then the text will display below as a new snippet. So in order to do that, we are going to create a template events. So we're going to create a new file, tmpl.toolbar.js, because this is on the toolbars template and not on the snippets template. We're going to go template.toolbar.events. And we're going to declare the different events. So the first one we're going to deal with is the click. So we're going to do the click and the ID of that button, which is btn_add, just like that. Create a regular function handler, just like you would for a regular event you might call through jQuery. But now inside of here, we're going to declare a variable. And that variable is txt node, so we're going to use a little bit of jQuery here just to quickly grab the text area, okay? Because we click the button, we want to be able to add the txt add text from there. So if txt node doesn't exist, or if txt node doesn't have a value, then we don't really want to do anything, so we're just going to go ahead and return. And now we're going to go ahead and add an insert. So we're just going to snippets insert into our snippets collection text.txtnode.val, which is the value from our text area, and then we're going to clear that text node value, which is pointing to txt add. So now inside of here, when we add something in here, hopefully fourth snippet, and click add, there you go. Created the snippet inside of our snippets collection, and of course that instantly appeared. We now want to do the same thing for key press. So it's normally on key press, but we take off the on portion of that. And we do a key press txt add, same thing with a function. We'll go ahead and add the if the key code is equal to 13, one sec here, is not equal to 13, then we're just going to go ahead and return. That means they didn't press enter, we really don't care about it, and we're just going to let it go. We're going to go ahead and do add snippet. Because we're using the exact same code that we're using up here, let's go ahead and pull that out and let's create a function where we can use the same code. So dry here. Let's go ahead and do add snippet function and just paste that code right in there. And there we go. So that should work. Let's go over to the browser and test it. So what we're expecting here is that now when we type something inside of that box, hit the enter key, it should add to our collection, and we'll make sure that click is still working, and there we go. Everything seems to be in order. Okay, so we were able to use default HTML input elements, specifically a button and an input type text inside of our toolbar. Gave it a little bit of styling, but other than that, it was a straightforward HTML input. And then we were able to handle the events for both the text key press and also for the button click inside of our template.toolbar.events declaration. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do, and you can add any other elements or inputs you would like that way as well in the future.
So our next video is going to be securing your application. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then. We will be going over the third video in section 2, creating content and adding collections, and that is securing your application. We're going to be going over securing data transactions. That means making sure that only the right people are able to access and insert data into our collection. Okay. We'll also be adding multiple user support so that when I log in, I will be able to see my snippets, and when you log in, you'll be able to see yours. So let's get started. As you probably noticed as we've created this application, you don't need to be signed in to be able to create any of the snippets, okay, or to be able to view any of the snippets for that matter. This is by definition not secure, because anybody can add anything, anybody can see anything that's going on, and that doesn't work very well if we're going to create a production type application. There is a specific Meteor package called insecure, and we use it for testing purposes, but we're ready to remove it. So we're going to go to command line, type in Meteor remove insecure, and just like that, the package has been removed. We now need to tell Meteor what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So we're going to go into the server.js file. Inside of server.js, we're going to type snippets.allow. And so on the collection, we're saying we're going to allow insert under these conditions. If this function returns true, this is the condition that's going to come back. And in this specific case, we're just going to see if there is a user ID. That means that somebody's logged in. Okay, so we're going to make sure that someone is logged in if they want to insert a snippet. We can go ahead and test this right now. Shouldn't be able to add this, and look, it didn't get added inside of there. And if we go into the console line, you can see that the insert failed because access was denied. Wow, nice and secure. So let's go ahead and add a user, user1@test.com, and just make up a password inside of there, add that, create it inside of there. Now, when we add something, added by user1, as you can see here, and hit enter, there it is. It's been created. Okay, nice and straightforward. We have some security, it's a modicum of security. Let's add just a little bit more. So back inside of our server.js file, and under the publish statement, we're going to add a condition to our find. And this condition is make sure that you only send stuff that where the owner of that document is the logged in user ID. Now notice that everything disappears when we do that. Yes, we are logged in. Yes, we can insert to the collection. Problem is we're not assigning an owner. So we're going to go into our tmpl toolbar.js file. We're going to find our insert statement, and we're going to add an owner. So we're going to say owner, and on the client side, we use meteor.userid as a function. That will get us the current logged in user. And of course, if there's no one logged in, we want to return, so let's update our return statement as well. Pretty straightforward. There we go. Now, when we add something, the first official personal snippet, and hit enter, it has been entered. And if we're sign out, you can see the list. Oh, there's the list of all the ones where the owner is null. Okay, so we need to do something about that. We want to get rid of those. Let's go ahead and open a Meteor shell, and let's do a find where owner is null and do a fetch on that so we can see the records, and we'll notice there's right around 8 or 9 records inside of there. Let's get rid of those. So we'll do a remove owner null, and 9 records are removed. So now nothing should be displayed if we're not logged in. And yep, everything disappeared. Let's log back in. There should be 1 record now that belongs to user 1. So when user 1 logs in, that will appear. Our publish statement is updating properly. Let's sign out, and let's create a new user, user2@test.com, and user 2 likes to think they're better than user 1, but that's okay because it's a snippet that only user 2 will ever see. User 1 should never be able to see that. So by adding these in the snippets insert, adding an owner, and using the meteor.userid, which is the current logged in user, and then in server.js, in our publish statement, modifying our find with the owner this user ID condition, we are able to secure our application even further. So only the logged in user is going to be able to see only their content, and when they publish something, they will be the owner of that particular document when they insert something inside of there. Okay, so we were able to secure our data transactions, meaning that our insert statement is now secure. You have to be a logged in user in order to create any kind of record inside of our snippets data collection. And we added an owner parameter so that when you create any kind of content or any snippet,
that snippet belongs to you. And we, of course, updated our publish statement to reflect that so that you will only be able to see snippets that belong to you as you're logged in. If you're not logged in, you can't create any snippets. And if you are logged in, you can create snippets that only you can see and no one else will be able to see them. Okay, so our data transactions are secure. And just by default, coming along with that is the ability for multiple users to be able to create this. So we created a user 1, created a user 2, and both of them have content, and neither the twain shall meet. Our next video is interacting with external services. Quite a great complement to what we're doing here. Look forward to it, and we'll see you then.
Today we will be going over the fourth video in section 2, creating content and adding collections, integrating with external services. We are going to create a Meteor server-only service from scratch that's going to interact with our existing Meteor application. In order to do that, it will connect to our existing application using DDP, and we'll show you how that's done. And the new service will listen in on the data, and based off of any changes to the snippets collection, it will insert and become a helper for the content of any of those snippets. What we want to happen is anytime that a URL is submitted, we want to be able to turn that into a link rather than just text. So in our current application, if we add, for example, http://meteor.com, it's text just like anything else. We can click on it, but it doesn't take us anywhere. This makes us sad panda. We definitely want to be able to have any links inside of our snippets just automatically go across. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a new Meteor application, Meteor create URL checker. We're going to go into that directory and we're going to remove everything, all of the different files inside of there, and we will make one directory, which is the server directory. Remember, this is going to be a server-only application or a server-only service. So inside of our URL checker folder, inside of our server folder, we're going to create a file and we will call this url-service.js. Okay. We need to create a connection to our existing service. And we will do that by declaring a variable con, and we will use DDP connect. And notice we're connecting to localhost 3000. That's where our current application is being served from. So now we're going to call a regular snippets collection, just like we would normally, new mongo.collection. And we're going to add the snippets channel. But this time we're going to add the connection as an additional argument. And this is going to say, hey, this collection already exists and it's already being served by this connection object, which is localhost 3000. So we need a little bit of admin security. So the best way to do that, to create a login, is through our UI. So we're going to go ahead and create admin@test.com with a password of Meteor. Now, user IDs are handled inside of Meteor using tokens. So we need to keep track of any token that we have. We're going to declare a little tiny collection here, a Mongo collection user tokens, and we're going to see if a token exists. If the token doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and initiate a login, and otherwise we're going to try to log in with that particular token. Okay. So if we have a valid token, then we're going to go ahead and proceed. So we're going to go ahead and say, if we do have a token, we are going to subscribe using that connection again to the snippets channel, just like we would on a regular client. So in this case, the server is actually acting as a client. And in the function, we want to be able to subscribe specifically to snippets find. And this creates a cursor. This cursor becomes very important because we're going to be listening to anything happening on the server side coming in from that snippets collection. So we're going to use a snippets.find observe changes. We can observe changes on deletes, on edits, and also on adds. So we are going to be listening for any new objects that are created inside of the snippets collection. And as they are added, we're going to make sure, number one, that they're valid, that there is something in the text field, and also that they don't have a URL. If they have a URL or if there's nothing in the text field, we're just going to return. Now, in the condition where there is something in the text field, we want to check to see if it's a URL. So this is a little bit overly simplified. We could use a regular expression, but we're just going to do a simple index of for HTTP. If it exists, then if it's at the beginning of that particular text, then we're going to go ahead and add now a URL property to that particular collection. So we'll say SURL equals SText, and then we're going to wrap this inside of a try just to make it a little bit less flimsy. It's very flimsy at this point, but it's just for illustrative purposes, so bear with us. We're going to do a snippets update, and we have the ID already, and we need to make sure that we update by ID because we're updating as a client. Remember that even though this is a service, it's acting as a client. So we will update ID is equal to the ID that was passed in, and then we will do a set statement for S. We've just updated S and set it in a set statement. Now, if there's any kind of error, we're going to log it to the console, and this will allow our application to keep running because it's inside of a try-catch block. So we'll give it some context here. We'll say there was an error updating, and we will pass in what the specific error message is. So just in case we run into any problems as we are trying to debug, we'll have the ID, and then we'll also be able to see what the error was specifically for that particular update. Let's be good syntax citizens and add our semicolons where they're needed. Now, if you remember up above, we declared init login and a login with token, but we haven't yet actually fleshed out those functions. So that's what we're going to do next. Just below our conditional statement, we'll go ahead and create the function init login. And because we're declaring it as function init login, we can actually flesh this out after we've already made a call to it inside of our conditional above. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is in that connection, we're going to call login. We're going to pass the user, which is just an email address. And remember, we used admin@test.com. And we're going to go ahead and pass in a plain words password. Now, don't worry too much about this. If you are worried about a production application and you want to make it a lot more secure, there are significantly better or significantly more secure ways to pass in a login token. We're just using this for illustrative purposes, and we could make it much more secure if we wanted to. Okay, so when we call login, the results we get back are asynchronous. So there's a callback function. Inside of this callback function, there are two parameters that are passed. One is an error object and one is a result object. If there was any kind of error, then the error object will not be null. So this is what we're checking for here. If error does exist, we're going to go ahead and go into the console and we're going to say error logging in. And to bring it to somebody's attention, actually, we're going to capitalize, make all caps the error. Okay. And then we will specifically pass what the error was so that we can debug if need be. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and return if that's the case. Otherwise, we'll get a result guaranteed. So if we don't get an error, we will get a result. And if we don't get a result, we will get an error. Okay, so we're going to take that result and we are going to store this inside of our tokens collection. Okay, remember we want to keep this token for future use. So we're going to use an upsert statement in case it already exists for the resultant user ID, which is the result.id, and we're going to set the result, which is the object itself that came back. Plain and simple, we don't need to fuss about how specifically it's stored because we just need the token off of it. Okay, now to log in with the token, we are going to declare our function, again using function login token syntax because we already have referenced it above. Okay. The token is passed into the login function, and we're going to do the same kind of connection call that we did before, but this time, instead of just doing a plain login, we're going to do a resume. So instead of passing a user ID and a password, we're now going to pass the token under the name value pair of resume. So the key for that is resume, right? Same thing here, we have an asynchronous function. If an error exists, then we want to know about it and we want to log that to the console. But we may encounter a condition where we were just trying to log in with an invalid token. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean out our tokens collection. Okay. and we're going to log and say, hey, we had an error logging in with a particular token. That's not too big of a deal because we still have our last resort, which is to do an init login. If, on the other hand, the token was able to resume our login, then we want to restore it in case there were any updates to it. So we'll do that familiar token upsert using the user ID that came in on the result. And we will again do a set with the result. Okay, again, we want to be good syntax citizens. So let's consolidate things a little bit here, add a semicolon. You know what? Let's even add a little comment inside of here to let everybody know that, hey, if we initially logged in with token and it didn't work, then we're going to log in with an init login, which is the user ID and password. Now that login's taken care of, we need to go back to our service or our initial application, and we need to allow update. Now remember, this service is going to update the URL, so we need to allow for this. So inside of our snippets.allow, we're going to say, okay, if you want to update, you need to make sure that you have a user ID. So if the user ID is null, then we will return false. In other words, nobody's logged in. And if the user ID is not null, then we will return true. In other words, you can update as long as you're logged in. I've got a little bit of cleanup work to do here. We've got some syntax issues. So let's go ahead and take care of those real quick. All right, we need to make sure we encapsulate that ID inside of some tags, some JSON tags. And it looks like we also need to pass in with the login with token. We need to pass in the token, obviously. Okay, great. All right, so our next problem that we actually have is, if you remember, on our original application, we are only publishing the results for the logged in user. Okay, so we need to actually create a new publish statement because remember, we're working as an admin here and we need to see everything. So we're going to go ahead and create meteor.publish snippets-admin. So this is a new channel, a new published channel that only the snippets admin or our server-only service can see. And we're going to create a function here, and we're just going to do a simple return snippets.find. Okay, this will return everything back instead of just the things that are owned by the logged in user. We need to make that change inside of our URL service.js file as well under the subscribe function. Okay, remember we were subscribing to snippets. We now need to subscribe to snippets admin. That's the only change we really need to make. Our service should be ready now, so we'll go ahead and go into the command line and we will run Meteor on a different port, Meteor --port 1337. So our application is up and running and it should now be combing over those results and adding a URL. Now this isn't reflected in our UI just yet, but if we go into the command line on our client and we do a snippets.find.fetch so that we get all the results back, we'll get 3 objects because we have 3 snippets, and you will notice that there is a URL. Okay, so that URL was actually added. If it wasn't a URL to begin with, then the URL's property is not added to the object. So depending on what we add inside of here, if we add a new one, let's say http://packedpub.com, go ahead and add that, and it should be pretty instantaneous. Okay, so if we rerun our find fetch and look at the last result, we'll actually put it into a table so we can see all the results at once. So we'll put that in a console table. And notice over here, if the text contained HTTP, the URL has been provided. So our service is up and running properly. Through observe changes on the cursor, we are looking into the added function and adding the SURL as necessary. So now we want to be able to display this properly in our UI. So we're going to go into our each snippets inside of our tmpl-snippets.html file, and we're going to add a conditional. Now, normally we might want to add something like if URL, but we want to add an additional helper inside of here just to make it a little bit cleaner. So instead of just checking for URL, we're going to say if is link In other words, if a URL exists, and we'll create that helper in just a moment. But if isLink is true, then we, instead of having a div to just display, we're now going to create a hyperlink using ahref. So here we have the a and the href, and we're going to put in, you guessed it, the URL property into that href. And then we'll go ahead and display the text inside of that. I will actually wrap this div inside of it, and we might as well reuse the div that's there. We will want an else statement, because if it's not a link, if the URL doesn't exist, then we want to display as normal. So we'll go ahead and end our if statement. We'll create a little room inside of there, and we will copy that self-same div into our else statement. So now that we've updated our HTML template, we need to go update our helpers for that isLink boolean. Okay, so we're going into our tmpl snippets.js file. We'll add an isLink function, and we will simply return inside of here whether or not URL exists. Now, the great thing about Meteor is, as we're going through this it creates a data context. That means that we can reference the existing data for this individual row just by putting in a this.data.url. So we'll set our conditional here, and if it's undefined, then we're going to return false. If it's not undefined, then we're going to return true. Looking back over the HTML template, it looks like we accidentally added a hash to our else, so let's take that off. And one other change we need to make inside of tmpl snippets.js, we actually don't need to reference this.data.url, it's just this.url. Okay, the data is implied. All right, so let's log in with a user2@test.com. Okay, we'll add that password inside of there. And now when we add a http://meteor, lo and behold, the link appears properly and it looks like a hyperlink. We'll try it with packedpub.com and go ahead and click on that to see if we go to Packed Publishing. And there we go, www.packedpub.com. Looks like everything's working properly. Our service is running and our UI template is now updating properly for isLink. So we created a server-only service from scratch that's able to connect to our existing application through DDP using a syntax that's familiar to us because we used it when we built our client. So the server, even though it is a server, is acting as a DDP client and is subscribing to any changes happening to the snippets collection on the remote server. If it finds a new snippet, in other words, if something was added, it checks to see if the text field contains HTTP, and if so, it will add the URL property to the snippet in the collection using a snippets.update. We modified our existing application code to allow for these updates coming from that external service, and we also updated our HTML template with a conditional to display a link if the URL exists. Our next video is actually section 3, creating clean web and REST services. Very, very exciting. If you have RESTful clients or RESTful servers that you would like to interact with, stay tuned for that. Thank you very much, and we'll see you then. Today we'll be going over the first video in section 3, creating clean web and REST services, an introduction to Iron Router. We'll take a look at Iron Router, why it's needed, and resources available for Iron Router to learn more about it, and then we'll install it for our application. When developing web applications, you want to be able to control flow, okay, where the user is at, what the user is looking at, and whether they're looking at multiple records, say, or a single individual record, or maybe even if they're updating something. The way to do that traditionally is through a routing package to control the page that they're on or the state that the application is in. Chris Mathers put together an excellent package called Iron Router. And this package is available in Atmosphere, and it has well over 43,000 downloads and 218 stars, by far the most popular package out there, and for good reason. It's well documented, it's constantly updated, and it's put together by someone who really knows what Meteor is all about. In the overview, you'll be able to see different resources that are available, including and especially the Iron Router guide that Chris has made available here. This will take you through a quick start to get up and running very, very quickly. It will cover in the table of contents all the different concepts of server and client side, the routing parameters, layouts, how it interacts specifically with Blaze, and everything that you need to know in order to get up and running very, very quickly. There's also an available video series on eventedmind.com. Okay, include an introduction video to see if it's right for you, and if so, there's a subscription in order to view the rest of the content. But if that's the way you learn, that's a fantastic resource available to you. We're now ready to install Meteor for the application we created in section 2. Okay, so head over to a terminal window and enter the command meteor add iron:/router. That's all it takes to download all of the necessary packages, the core package, the controller, everything that is needed in order to run inside of our application. And even though we haven't configured any routes yet, we can see that it's available and it's properly installed. If we go back to our homepage, you can see there it is, Iron Router, organize your Meteor application with a sample of how to use it. If we scroll down, you can see the GitHub repo that's available, as well as the guide that we referred to earlier. So that's your introduction to Iron Router, some guides that are available, documentation, and we have installed it for our application as well. In our next video, using Iron Router templates, we'll specifically go over configuration of those templates inside of our application. Thanks, and we'll see you then. Today we will be going over the second video in section 3, creating clean web and REST services using Iron Router templates. We'll apply this specifically to our snippets application, so we'll have a global configuration so that no matter what we put in, it will go directly into the Iron Router main template. We will apply that template, and then we will set up for server-side routing. So the first thing that we need to do is put a wrapper around our initial body tag with its Meteor templates inside of our snippets.html. This is a little bit brute force, but it's illustrative of what you can do inside of Iron Router. So we're going to go ahead and create a template tag around this body. So we're going to go ahead and type inside of here, template name equals main. Use autocomplete to create the template and template tag and put that at the bottom. There we go. So now we've got a wrapper around our main body tag, and we have our template declarations inside of there, toolbar and snippets, and we are ready to tell Iron Router to use this as the main template. So we're going to go into our client.js file. And inside of client.js, we need to create a router.configure. And when we do a router.configure, this will configure it for everything, for the global configuration. And if we specify inside of here layout template, and we go ahead and put the name of that template inside of there, that's it. That's all that we need to do in order for it to be configured properly. So now we'll refresh the page just to make sure. And as you can see, everything's being rendered properly inside of here. And since we've set it to all endpoints to point to this, it really doesn't matter what we put in here. So if we put in whatever we put in there, it's going to render that template. We're now going to do something similar on the server side for a specific API. So we want to create a file structure for this. So we're going to create an API folder. Okay, name that API. And then we'll create a rest.js file inside of there. So let's go ahead and click new file, rest.js. There we go. And we will put a configuration, a specific route for API inside of here. So we'll type router.route and we'll give it that endpoint, that API route. And so then that will be available for other clients or other servers to be able to interact with us. Now we do want this only to be on the server side. So we're going to put in a special parameter here. This is the where server parameter. Okay. And that's pretty much it. That's all we need to do. We'll straighten it up here a little bit. But that's pretty much its routing whenever we go to API to that specifically. We're going to use a built-in feature inside of Iron Router, and this is a chained method. So we're going to go ahead and take off that semicolon, and we're going to do a get. Okay, so this is a shortcut telling us that whenever we get a get request inside of here, this is how we should handle it. So we put a function wrapper around that, and we'll go ahead and we need to do two things. The first thing we need to do is we need to write our headers. We'll always need to write our headers, and then we need to put up a specific response for a get request. In the spirit of not repeating ourselves, we're going to go ahead and just put a function call inside of here, and we need to pass in this, which is the request and the response, because we need to have that specific context. And now let's go ahead and send a response for get. We don't want to support get just because we're going to focus on post, so we're just going to put a simple message, get is not supported, sorry. All right, let's go ahead and write that headers function now. So we'll do function write headers, and we'll add in that self. That's the same thing as the this in this particular response. Now we're going to actually just copy and paste this over instead of typing it out, but we will go over each individual line item. So we've got the self.response status code equals 200. And this is just to let all the clients know that everything's copacetic, that you did actually, in fact, get to the right place. So that's the self response status code equals 200. Pretty standard stuff there. Next is the content type. We want to be able to let the clients know that it's application JSON is the content type. Then we've got some information surrounding access control. This is mostly for security purposes, but it's pretty standard headered stuff. So you've got your allow origin, you've got your access control allow headers for origin, X requested with, content type, and accept. And as mentioned, we'll be using that a lot, so it's good to have it all in one place instead of typing it out every time. Okay, so now when we come here into our API endpoint, you can see get is not supported. All right, so we are properly processing that message from a get request, which is the standard request that comes inside when you enter this inside of a browser. Now, any other endpoint is going to resolve to that global configuration template that we put in there before. So we are safe on the server side using API, and Iron Router on the client side is handling everything else. So we're doing that specifically through a router.route, a specific API route, and then the get function chain to handle any kind of requests that come in over get. All right, so we went over a global configuration, how to have everything default to a specific template, to a main template. We applied that main template to the body of our application, and we set up our initial server-side routing using a specific endpoint. We'll get more in depth in that in our next video, creating REST endpoints. Okay, we'll go over specifically post, put, and delete. This will round out our REST API so that we can use it by another client. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video. Today we will be going over the third video in section 3, creating clean web and REST services, creating REST endpoints. We will be creating the post, put, and delete endpoints for our service so that we are able to query the content, we're able to update the content, and of course we're able to delete the content as needed. We will use the function chaining inside of Iron Router to accomplish this, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to pick up right where we left off before, going into the end of our get function, and we're going to chain a function here for post. This is very similar to what we did up above. We obviously need to write the headers. There's a reason why we separated that out so that we can do that. And now we need to check to see if an email address was sent in with the request. Okay, so we're going to do a very simple this.request.body.email. If it doesn't exist, we don't even want to go anywhere. So we'll just send a quick response back saying, hey, no user was specified, and then we'll return. Okay, so now we need to find out whether or not the user exists because we can't just use the email address. So we're going to be using a very specific a MongoDB query. Okay, it's called elm match, and it's because the emails, the way that they're stored inside of Meteor users is an array. So we're going to use Meteor users.find one, but inside of that emails array, we're going to do an elm match to find out where the address is equal to what was entered as far as the user email. If that email wasn't specified or if the user doesn't exist, then we need to deal with that. So we will do the same thing we did above. If no user, then we'll send a quasi-friendly message to this response.end, user not found, and then we'll go ahead and return. Okay, great. Now we get to deal with the case where we do have everything in order, and it's a very, very simple query. It's just snippets.find where the owner is equal to the user underscore ID, fetch. Now we need to put this in the response end as a string, so we'll use JSON stringify to do that. And that's it. It's a very simple query, and now our posts service is done. So we can go ahead and test this. There's a great tool out there to do that. It's called Postman. It's found here inside of Chrome. It's a very popular plugin because of what it does. It makes it so that we can post to a service very, very easily. So when you're working with some APIs, this is definitely the way to go. If you have another method of interacting, another REST client that you like to use, feel free to use that, no problem. But we're going to use this for our demonstration. So inside of the Postman interface, we're going to go ahead and enter our URL. And this, of course, is http://localhost 3000. And remember that we are using the API endpoint. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. We want to change from get to post. Okay. And we are going to need to put in a header to let it know that we're sending JSON across the wire. So we're going to go ahead and put in a type here. I have a shortcut built, but this will make content type application JSON, which is exactly what we need to send JSON across to our service. We're now ready to enter our request. We're going to go ahead and click on raw, and we are going to use JSON to send that across. So we've got the email parameter set, and we've got it set to user1@test.com. Okay, so everything looks good there. We're going to go ahead and click send. All right. And as we click send, it looks like we got to scroll down again. There we go. So we've got the results from our service put out in raw JSON format. It looks great. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the update portion or the put portion. So we'll create a same function. We're chaining just like we did before. We got to write headers just like we did before as well. And now we need to check to see if there's an actual request coming in, because if there's no request coming in, then we don't need to do anything with it. So we'll quickly check for the record, this.body.update. That's what we'll call it. And if it doesn't exist, then we'll put in that quasi-friendly message that says nothing was requested. And then we'll go ahead and end. Now let's assume that we do have a record. Okay, this record has parameters on it because it is JSON. So we're going to update using upsert. Okay, and we're just going to get that record ID. We're going to find a record ID and insert it into our JSON. And then we'll go ahead and set anything that was in the changes section of that record that we came across. We'll log to the console, and then we'll print out a friendly message that says the snippet was updated. And that's it. Very, very simple query as well there. Okay, so let's find a snippet that's worthy of being changed. It looks like we have a frowny face. How did that get in there? Okay, let's go ahead and, using our original query, find that frowny face. There it is. We'll pull the ID. And now instead of us doing a posts in our header, we will do a put. Okay, so we will use the same query as before, the same URL, but instead of using post, we'll use put. Okay, same content type, application JSON. And now looking down at the JSON itself, you'll notice that it is a little bit more complicated. We have an update object, we have an ID on top of that, and then we have some changes that we'll make inside of there. So we will add or paste in that ID into the ID section, and we wanted to change from a frowny face to a smiley face. So let's go ahead and do that. Put in a smiley face, and let's make it really happy. Let's actually add the word happy to it as well to let everybody know how happy we are that our REST service is working. Ew, even an exclamation mark. Let's do that. Okay, let's click send. And the snippet has been updated. That's the correct response that we got back. Let's check inside of our UI, and there it is. Inside of the UI, it is reflecting properly and happy. That was a little over the top with the happy part. Smiley faces are happy enough, so we'll click send and we'll update again. And just because Meteor is reactive, it's instantly updated inside of our UI. We have one more endpoint to create. That's the delete endpoint. So we'll create it inside of the same function chain. We need to write our headers like usual. Okay. And now we need to scroll down here a little bit. Check to see if an ID was sent for deletion. Okay, so we need to make sure that an ID was sent. We'll do a request.body.down. We'll call it snippet ID. If it's not there, then we'll do the usual crazy friendly message of no ID submitted, and then we'll return. Now we'll assume that the ID is there. It's a very simple delete. It's just snippets.remove, and we'll use that record ID that was passed in as our parameter. We'll also log to the server console so that we can see what's going on, and then we need a friendly response. Snippet deleted. Okay, that's sufficiently friendly. Okay, that's it. Very, very simple. Okay, let's go ahead and add inside of our UI some kind of grotesque snippet that we want to get rid of. There's a bunch of ASCII characters. That'll do just nicely. So we're going to use our initial post endpoint to find that snippet ID. There it is. It starts with a G at the bottom. We'll go ahead and copy that to our clipboard. And then we will create this new delete request. Okay, so instead of using post, we'll use delete, same localhost 3000/API, same application JSON, and very, very simple. We'll just say snippet ID. We'll paste in the ID there inside of that JSON and click send, and the snippet is deleted. Just like that, very simple query. So we've gone over post, put, and delete. With post, we were able to find all of the snippets that belong to a certain user email. With put, we were able to take any of the IDs and change the content based off of that. And of course, we were able to delete using the same method. Our next video is actually section 4, creating responsive user interfaces. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you then.
Today we will be going over the first video in section 4, creating responsive user interfaces, structuring your UI with masonry. We'll use some basic CSS to structure our application. We will add the masonry container and masonry elements to our templates to give it that nice responsive look and feel. All right, so the first thing that we'll want to be able to do is differentiate between one snippet and another snippet. So we're going to go ahead and give a little bit of structure to our snippet. Here in our CSS, we're going to go ahead and do the snippet class. We're going to declare a width of, let's say, 250 pixels, and we'll do the height right about the same for right now. Yeah, 250 pixels looks good. Okay, and then we're also going to put a bordered property. This will make it so that we can see the border, and just for kind of testing purposes. So we'll give it a nice solid border side of here of 2 pixels, and we will make it just a nice kind of grayish color. We're now going to want to add that border to our existing HTML. So we're going to go into tmpl-snippets.html, and here inside of our div class snippet, we're going to add bordered property to each of those. Just like so. Right, so now they should have a border and they should take up all the properties of that CSS. Let's go ahead and refresh our page and see what that looks like. Scrolling up and down, we do see that we've got the right structure. We've got a nice square and gray pixels. So now we're going to separate out our templates just a little bit to make sure that we are ready for when we're going to be using masonry. So we're going to create a new template. It's going to be called snippet. And we're going to take this code that's inside of the each statement up here inside of our snippets template. We'll cut that out and we will paste it directly into that snippet. No other changes. We'll now create a template inclusion up at the top inside of our snippets template that just directly references that snippet. That should be all there is to it. It should look exactly the same in the UI and testing. It does indeed look exactly the same. All right, so now we're ready to start adding the masonry container and the masonry elements. We're going to start here inside of our top container inside of snippets, and we're going to go ahead and do a hash masonry container. Okay, that's the declaration to include the masonry container. We're going to give it a proper ID, which will become important for anything that's going into that masonry container, and we're going to name it very originally masonry container. Okay, we're going to set a column width, and this is just a kind of a division to let us know where to break to the next line. And then we're going to give a transition duration. This is just for animation effects. We'll give it just a 0.1 second transition effect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that tag off after the each. So notice that the each snippets template inclusion is included inside of or wrapped inside of the masonry container template inclusion. All right, so now here inside the snippets, we're going to do a template inclusion for the masonry element. There's that hash masonry element. And now we need to reference it by ID from what we put inside of our masonry container, or which masonry container we want to include. So there it is. We've got our masonry container identified there as a parameter of that template inclusion. We'll go ahead and close that off with the masonry element. And that's pretty much all we need to do to add masonry to our templates. Okay, so this masonry element that we see here is referencing masonry container, which is the ID of our masonry container in our snippets template. Looking in the UI, it looks like masonry has taken care of the layout for us, and it's very responsive. Simple as that, we were able to add masonry. So using some basic CSS, we were able to give our application some structure. The snippets now line up nicely and they have the right dimensions. We were also able to add the masonry container and masonry elements to our templates to give it that responsive look and feel. Our next video will be styling with Bootstrap, where we'll really give it that polish and that professional look. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. Today we will be going over the second video in section 4, creating responsive user interfaces,
Styling with Bootstrap. In this video, we will use the Bootstrap panel's objects and the styling that comes with it to give our application and our snippets a real nice look and feel. We'll add some buttons instead of links to give it that polished look, and then we'll do some basic UI cleanup to make sure that everything looks nice and balanced on the page. So taking a quick look at the Bootstrap documentation, we can see here a panel with heading. Okay, and we want our UI to look similar to this, so each snippet will have a nice title to it and a nice content section inside of it. Here's what the CSS or the HTML looks like with the different classes. You can see the panel, panel heading, and panel body. So we're going to go ahead and use that inside of our own application. So inside of our tmpl-snippets.html file, inside of our snippet template, we're going to go ahead and declare a div, and we're going to give it a lot of different classes. We're going to give it the snippet class, the panel class, and the panel success. The panel and the panel success, give it those dimensions and that polish from Bootstrap. Okay, we're going to wrap everything inside of that. Okay, everything looks good there. Okay, we're now ready to declare the header, okay, and the body. So let's start with the header. We're going to create a new div, and it's going to have a class property of panel-heading, like so. Right, we're going to wrap the title inside of a H3 to give it a little bit more boldness, and we're going to also wrap it inside of the class of panel title so that it's properly positioned. Okay, we'll go ahead and put a reference to the text right there. Everything looks in order for our title. We'll check that in just a minute. And now we're going to go ahead and do our body. So we're going to do a div panel-body. Okay, and inside of here, we're actually going to put a little bit of a placeholder. We're going to put the word desk, D-E-S-C. Now that property doesn't exist yet, but we're going to go ahead and add descriptions a little bit later. So we're going to just put this in as a placeholder for now. Our next order of business is to clean up the URL just a little bit. Now remember, it used to be kind of like the header. We don't want it to be that anymore. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take that particular div, we're going to pull it out, and inside of our ahref here, we're now going to declare it as a new class, and we're going to make it a button. So we're going to put in the btn and the btn large. We're going to make it a rather large button, and then btn info to give it that kind of a white with a blue background. We'll just put the word link inside of there. And that should be enough to style it. We do need to take out our else statement because we don't need it anymore. If the link doesn't exist, then the button's not going to be there. Okay, we don't need anything else if there's not a button because we have the title up here, as you can see inside of panel-title in our H3. So we've got our description that we'll use in a little bit. We've got our new ahref inside of just a fresh, clean if-is link with no else statement. And now let's see what it looks like. All right, so yeah, everything looks pretty good. We do notice that the link is hugging the side just a little bit there. So let's go ahead and fix that. We're going to go inside of our isLink statement, and we're going to create a panel body. Okay, we didn't wrap that ahref inside of a panel body, and this will show you some of the style that's built directly into Bootstrap. So as we save that change, now you can see perfect. All right, the links are in place. They're properly set up so that they look all nice. And we're going to now go in. We don't really like the height. Okay, the snippets and the panels are just a little bit too large. So we're going to go ahead and do a min height, and we're going to shorten that down a little bit. Now, what this will allow us to do when we're using a min height instead of a height is it will grow with it. So if we do have a rather long description, it will show up properly. But now you can see everything looks great. It's all nice and lined up. Now we're going to go into tmpl snippets.html once more. And inside of here, we are going to add a little bit of a gutter inside of our container. Okay, this is just some spacing in between the different snippets, about 4 pixels. You can see that that looks really, really great inside of there. So everything's looking nice and snappy. The UI is nice and responsive, and we are ready to add some interactivity. Okay, so we went over the Bootstrap panel object, and we were able to create those for our snippets. They look nice and professional. We changed out the typical URL with a button using btn and btn info, and we were able to clean up the UI with some simple additions to either the masonry container or to the CSS. Our next video is going to be additional interactivity. We're going to really get going and add some additional functionality to our snippets application. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. Today we'll be going over the third and final video in section 4, creating responsive user interfaces, additional interactivity. We're going to enable inline editing, which means we'll be able to add a description or edit the description of an existing snippet. In order to do this, we will be handling the input events of either the keyboard or the mouse on the various elements, and we will go over modifying the records and have them reflected on the screen. If you remember from our last video, we had added a desk, DESC, inside of our panel body. Okay, this is a new property, and we're going to go ahead and show you what that looks like if we were to display it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to find one of the existing snippets. We're going to do a find one in the console here, and it looks like the adobe.com link came up. We're going to grab the object ID there, and we're going to do really quickly here do a snippets.update by that ID, C_ID, and then we're going to go ahead and add in that ID that's unique to the adobe.com snippet. And then we're going to go ahead and do a set statement, and we're going to set the DESC or the description to, let's say, Adobe Systems, just something nice and generic inside of there. That's the proper name for Adobe. We'll go ahead and put that in there, and this will update the record automatically. And when it does, you'll notice that the description automatically appeared. So the next step for us is to be able to add that description to each and every snippet that exists or to new snippets. Okay, so we're going to go into our TMPL snippets.html, and we're going to add inside of here a class for DESC inside of here. This will be used as an identifier. It's not for styling purposes. It's going to be used as an identifier so that we can create some events inside of it. There is one little style element that we do need to add, and that's on hover. Okay, so when we hover over, we want to be able to say, hey, you can go ahead and click here, be able to edit the content. So we're going to give it a border radius of 5 pixels just to make it look nice and neat. And then we're going to add a border. And this border, we're going to make it about 2 pixels. We're going to make it gray. And instead of doing solid, let's go ahead and turn that to a dashed instead. Yeah, because it'll make it look a little bit temporary. Okay, so let's test this out. As we hover over each of the individual snippets, you can see that there's this dashed border, which is an indication that, hey, you can click here and you should be able to edit the content. So now we want to be able to edit that content, right? So let's go back into our file system inside of TMPL snippets.html, and we're going to add an if statement inside of here, an if template. If editing, we want to be able to display something besides just the description. Okay, we'll go ahead and do an else, and because if we're not editing, then obviously we want to display the static description. So we'll go ahead and wrap that inside of the else and a /if at the end. All right, and position that nicely. Okay, now inside of our editing, if this is the record that's being edited, we want to add a text area, and the name really kind of doesn't matter. We'll just go ahead and put it in description because that's exactly what it is. We won't need the ID or the calls, so we'll get rid of that, and then we'll make the rows only about 3. We don't want it to be very, very tall. Okay. Now we're going to add 2 classes, and these classes become important for 2 reasons. First, so that Bootstrap can style properly. That's why we got the form-control. And the next one is as an identifier. So we're going to go ahead and put the identifier of editing inside of there. So if this particular snippet is being edited, then we can identify the text area very easily. We're going to put in the default value, which is the description if it exists inside of there. And now let's rearrange it a little bit to make it a little bit more readable. So we've got our name, we've got our rows, we've got our class, and we've got our value equals desk, DESC. So everything looks like it's in order there. We are now going to add the editing helper because of the if editing condition that we just put in there. We need to add that helper for when it is truly editing. So we're going to go inside of our template.snippet.helpers and add an editing function. And we're going to just simply return inside of here a session variable. So we're going to go ahead and return session.equals, and we're going to put in the current edit. So if the current edit is equal to the ID of this individual record, which we can access through this._ID, then it will return true, and we'll know that we're editing. We'll be able to set that inside of the UI in just a moment here, but that's pretty much all we'll need there. We do want to set up a couple of events, and so we're going to create a new template.snippet.events section, and the first event we're going to use is on the click event. So if we click inside of that description border that comes up, that little, hey, click me here to edit the description that we added with the border on top of it, we're going to go ahead and put in a function call. And inside of there, we're just going to simply set the session variable of current edit equal to the ID of the corresponding snippet. So we're going to do a session.set current edit, and then we're just going to do a this._ID. Now remember, we have that context because we're using Meteor. Okay? Really, really awesome property of Meteor, and something that we're grateful that we can just access like that. So now on each of these individual areas, when we click, we can see that we're editing. And I am now editing each individual section. You notice that the changes aren't sticking yet. That's because we haven't created the event just yet. So let's go ahead and do that too. So inside of our snippet.events, inside of our tmpl snippets.js file, we're going to look for that particular text area. We've got the class name of it as editing, as you recall. So we're going to go ahead and put inside of here, we're going to do a key up. And the reason we're using key up rather than key pressed is so that we can use the escape key as well, so that we can cancel things out. So we're going to do a key up dot editing. We're going to add a function or event handler for that. And the first thing we're going to check to see is if it's the escape key. If it's the escape key, we just want to cancel all changes. Okay, and that's really easy to do. All we have to do is just set the session variable of current edit to null. So we're going to do an if key code is equal to 27, which is the escape key. Then we're just going to simply session.set current edit to null. Okay. And then we're just going to return. Now that we've taken care of cancel, we need to take care of submit. Okay, we've got a special key code combination, which is going to be shift enter. Shift enter is going to be our submit, and that means we're going to want to change the description. Okay, so the way that we check for that is first doing the same thing. We're going to check to see if the key code is equal to 13. If it's not equal to 13, which is enter, or if the shift key is not being held down, and we're going to do that by an e.shift key, or more appropriately a not e.shift key, then we're just going to return. So the only way we're going to get to this new section is if the key code is equal to 13, which is enter, and if the shift key is being held down. So we don't have to worry about any if statements. And we're going to just do a simple snippets update, just like we did in the command line. We're going to set the ID equal to this ID. Remember, we have the context because of Meteor, yay Meteor. And we're just going to do a simple set. We're going to set the description or DSC to current target dot value. Okay, straight from the DOM. All right, that should take care of everything. Make sure we have all of our parentheses, everything in place. And then we are going to set the current edit equal to null, which means we're going to cancel out of the editing process. So everything looks in order. We're going to go ahead and make some changes inside of here. We'll test the enter versus shift enter. We'll test the escape key to see if the changes aren't reflected there. And we'll even add a new snippet just for good measure. Okay, and we'll see how incredibly interactive this is. So it looks good. Everything is being saved to the database as appropriate. We're able to get away with very little code in order to do this because of the context that Meteor provides us. So great job. All right, now that everything's been displayed properly in the UI, we want to see what it looks like inside of the database. So we're going to go ahead and open a terminal window into our root project directory. Inside of that project directory, we're going to go ahead and type Meteor shell. This will allow us to run find commands directly on the server. So we're going to go ahead and run a find command. We're going to type snippets.find. We have copied over the owner ID. So we'll paste that right in there. We'll close that off and we'll do a .fetch, hit enter, and there we go. There's our records. Check a couple of them, just spot checking here to see. You got an ID, a description, and an owner. Looks like everything's right in shape with how it should be. Okay, so we're able to add inline editing to our application. Okay, through the use of hover events, through the use of clicks and key presses, we're able to handle those events and render the UI properly for editing mode. We were also able to modify the records and have those instantly reflected in the UI because of the reactive model that Meteor comes with and that we're so familiar with. Our next video is actually section 5, deploying your application, so we can really get going and use this in production. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in section 5. Today we'll be going over the first video in the final section, section 5, deploying your application. This one is deploying to meteor.com. Inherent inside of Meteor is the ability to deploy to the test servers that point to meteor.com. We'll show you exactly how to do that in the command line. It's very straightforward. We'll look at modifying the existing service that we have that is listening to our local host. We'll have it listen instead to meteor.com. And then we will also test the application to make sure that the deployment was carried out properly. Okay, now that our application is up and running on localhost, we're ready to deploy this to a server for testing. Okay, so we're going to go into the command line. Meteor makes this very, very easy to do. We're going to go ahead and stop our application, and we're simply going to type meteor deploy, and then we're going to name it something unique. In this case, we're going to do packed-snippets.meteor.com. Okay, we could have entered anything, but we decided to enter packed snippets. Now you'll see it's deploying to this packed-snippets.meteor.com, and it's uploading. This could take a little while, so we've sped this part of it up, but it should be ready very soon here. And now it's serving http://packed-snippets.meteor.com. We can put this into a browser and replace localhost 3000, and it looks like it's working, right? Even the signup's there, so we'll go ahead and create that user, the user1 at test.com. And let's go ahead and create a couple of snippets just to make sure everything's working properly. So we'll go ahead and put in here our very first public, let's call it URL snippet. Okay. Let's edit the description, put in something real simple inside of there, make sure it sticks. And look, everything's working just great. All right. There is one problem that we're going to run into, and that's because our service is no longer running. So when we put in a URL, it's not being listened to, because remember, we were listening on localhost. So there's no link button inside of there because the service isn't running against our newly deployed URL. So let's go ahead and remedy that. It's pretty straightforward how to do that. First thing we need to do is create that admin user. Okay, so we'll create admin at test.com with the same user ID and password that we had when we were running it on localhost. All right. Now we're going to go into our URL checker. This is that other service that we created. And right up there at the top, under the connection, instead of pointing to localhost 3000, we're going to add our new URL, which is packed-snippets.meteor.com. That's pretty much all we have to do. We want to clean up the database a little bit. We have the tokens that we have inside of there because we want to get rid of the old ones. So we'll go ahead and do a Meteor reset inside of our terminal window. Okay, that resets the project, gets rid of all of those nasty little tokens that were there for localhost 3000. And now we'll go ahead and run Meteor again on port 1337, just like last time. Okay, this will start everything up, make sure that the application gets built properly. And now we see that our app is running again on localhost 1337. So now instead of listening to port 3000 in localhost, it will now be listening to our newly created service. Let's check it out. Okay, we're going to log back in as user1 at test.com. Put in the password there. And lo and behold, look, our link's working. All right, let's test it. And let's add another one inside of there and see if the service is indeed listening. And it's created immediately. So it is working. So our service is now monitoring because we fixed the URLs. Let's go ahead and test one of these. This link is to PackedPub. And yep, it's working just fine. So everything seems to be in order. We've been able to create that service. Okay, we were able to deploy our application through a simple deploy command in the command line in the terminal. We were able to modify our existing service to point to the new meteor.com link instead of to our local host. And we were able to test this in production, so to speak, by going to our newly created meteor.com URL. Our next video is deploying to a custom host name. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. Today we'll be going over the second video in section 5, deploying your application, deploying to a custom host name. Very similar to the process for deploying to meteor.com, we can deploy to our own domain using a CNAME redirect, We'll go over how to do that, and we will deploy the application to our newly created domain, and then we'll test that deployment using our newly created custom host name. Inside of our domain management admin for 211.com, we've created a CNAME redirect. Okay, we're going to scroll down here. You can see it. It's for snippets, and it's pointing to origin.meteor.com. Okay, that's all that we need to do in order to deploy to that. Let's see that in the command line. So this time, instead of deploying directly to something.meteor.com, we will now use Meteor to deploy, and we will deploy to snippets.211.com. Now remember, that is redirecting to origin.meteor.com, and it treats it exactly the same as if we were deploying directly to a meteor.com subdomain. Okay, deploying there, uploading. Again, this will take a little while to go through, but we've sped this up for you so you can see the result. And now it's serving at http snippets.211.com. Go ahead and put that into a browser just to test it. And of course, we have to recreate the users because this is a brand new installation, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and sign up real quick here with user@test.com to make sure that we can add snippets. All right, let's go ahead and add a snippet or two. This is going to be our first hosted name snippet. And it looks like the snippet has been accepted. We can go ahead and change the description. Everything's working as it should. So using the CNAME redirect to origin.meteor.com acts exactly as if we were deploying to a subdomain on meteor.com directly. All right, so using a simple CNAME redirect inside of our domain hosting admin, we were able to redirect to origin.meteor.com. We were then able to deploy using Meteor deploy in the command line, and then we were able to test it just like we would had it been deployed directly to the meteor.com servers. Our next video is deploying to a custom server. It's very exciting to be able to deploy to your own custom built server. That's what we'll go over in the next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. Today we will be going over the final video in section 5, deploying your application, deploying to a custom server. We'll be using a package called Meteor Up, or MUP for short, to be able to deploy to our custom server. So we'll show you how to install that. We'll show you what the configuration files look like and how to set this up on your own server. And finally, we'll show you how to deploy and test this to your own server. And we'll even throw in a little bit of Nginx reverse proxy for you. So let's go ahead and get started. This time around, our domain is hosted by DigitalOcean as a droplet called Snippets. Okay, we're going to go into the DNS entries and check those to make sure that we have a subdomain for snippets.edge.io. And we do. It's a simple internal CNAME redirect to edge.io, so everything looks like it's in shape there. We're now going to go onto the server itself. Okay, and we're going to look at one of the Nginx configuration files. This one is specific for the subdomain snippets.edge.io. Okay, and inside of here, you're going to see something pretty interesting. Instead of handling it directly on port 80, we're going to be listening on port 80 for the server name snippets.edge.io. But then if we look inside of the location and the proxy pass, it's actually going to something very familiar to us, localhost 3000. Nginx is going to take care of the translation for us, so all we have to focus on is getting that service up and running on localhost 3000. Okay, we need to install MUP on our local development environment, so we're going to do a sudo npm install-g MUP and enter our password. This is sped up for your convenience, and this will install MUP, and we'll go ahead and test it just by putting in the command mup, hitting enter. It looks like it is running. We're going to go ahead now and configure it. We're going to go ahead and initialize our project by typing mup init, and just like that, we created an empty project. Notice we are inside of our snippets folder. There are two files, the settings.json file, which we don't need to worry about, and then the mup.json file that we're clicking on right here. Okay, this particular file tells us where we're going to be installing this application. So the host name is going to change from host name, obviously, to snippets.edge.io. We have a user ID and password, but we're going to go ahead and obfuscate that for this video. We want it to install Mongo or set up Mongo, so we're going to set that to true. We also want to set up Node. We want to go to the latest version, which is 10.34, so we'll change that. We want to install Phantom.js on the server, And then we're going to have an application name. And this application name, we're going to go ahead and change it to snippets. Now, the location of the app, this is asking where is your application located on your dev machine. Since this file is located inside of our root project folder, we're just going to go ahead and make a simple reference to snippets, the // and that will tell us where our application is located. All right, everything looks good on side of there. Now, remember that we are using Nginx to redirect to localhost 3000. So inside of the root URL, instead of putting snippets.edge.io, we're going to go ahead and just put localhost, and then we're going to tell it which port. And you guessed it, we're going to go on port 3000. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. Okay, we're going to save all those changes, make sure everything looks good. And now we're going to set up our server. This is before we deploy, we're just going to set up the environment. So we're going to go into the terminal, and inside the terminal, we are going to put in MUP setup. Now this will install Node.js onto our server, and you can see the log that's going on here. This is also sped up. It actually takes quite a while to install Node, Phantom, and everything else, MongoDB, that we need on the server. But you should, after a while, be able to see the success. Everything looks like it was set up properly. And now we simply have to type up deploy, MUP deploy. Okay, this will create our build, and it will upload that bundle to our server. It'll set up any environment variables that we have, and then it will invoke the deployment process, which means it'll keep running as if it were in production. We now want to test our configuration file back on the server. So logged into the server, we're going to type in nginx-t. This will check the syntax of our configuration file, and it will run a preliminary test to make sure that it was successful. And it looks like the configuration is set up properly. So looks like everything's shipshape up and running. We're going to first test this again on the server. We're going to do a simple curl command, and inside this curl command, you can see we got some HTML back, and we got a Meteor runtime config, so it looks like we're good. We're going to run it in the browser and see what happens. So we're going to go to a browser, and we're going to type in snippets.edge.io, hit enter, and lo and behold, our service is running. Create a user like usual, user1@test.com, and we are going to add our first custom server deploy snippet. How about that? It's been quite the journey, but we finally have our snippets application deployed on our own server. As you might expect, the folks at Meteor are going to make this process even easier in the future, so stay tuned for that. All right, we were able to install and configure Meteor up in our development environment. Through the use of setup and through the use of deploy, we were able to deploy this to our servers. And finally, we were able to test this deployment using the host name for our custom server.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this series. It's been my absolute pleasure to walk you through all of what Meteor can do in such a short amount of time. On behalf of everybody at Pack Publishing, thank you very much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this series, and we hope that you'll join us again for yet another series in the many, many video tutorials we have available on packpub.com. Thanks.